There are 5 words dividing the world. They reach far back into history but awake passions and fears today. The words are the gravest crime against humanity, and they are in a United Nations resolution about the transatlantic slave trade. Look at how different countries voted on whether that phrase should apply. The green countries voted in favor. The 3 red countries voted against, the US, Israel and Argentina. And the yellow countries abstained. That includes all of the European Union. Did the vote show the majority of the world global south on one side and the global north, which often profited from slavery, on the other? I talked with Professor Olibet Otele. She's a research professor in the field.
Yes, certainly does, because it's kind of echoes something that happens before, which is the 2001 Durban Conference, where those who voted against voted against again in 2026, and those who abstained today are, as you mentioned, former colonial powers. And that really shows that the debate about colonial enslavement, but also the legacies of the past, are at the top end of discussions these days.
That colonial enslavement the resolution is talking about lasted more than 400 years. Millions of people were stolen from Africa, shipped to the Americas and forced to work. People of color were portrayed as subhuman to justify the removal of their human rights. The long-term effects can be seen today in a lack of inherited wealth, heritage and enduring racism. But these discussions were not enough to persuade any European Union country to vote in favor of the resolution, which calls for reparations, apology, and restitution of cultural objects.
I think that one of the things that they're all afraid of is the question of reparations. And it was the case already in 2001, but they realized some 20 years later that the question of reparation is not going away. But I also have to mention the fact that the declaration is not legally binding. So they also missed on an opportunity to show that they actually condemn the transatlantic enslavement and therefore recognize the impact that the trade had on various communities across the globe. So abstaining was, for me, hypocritical, really.
Within that bloc of abstainers was Germany. It has a strong history of apologizing, taking responsibility, and paying reparations for the Holocaust. Why would it not vote to support the resolution on slavery?
Historically, Germany as a country was is a young country, 19th century, but the Kingdom of Brandenburg, which would be part of Germany, was actually involved and tried to get involved. They did not manage to. They tried really hard. The ships that they invested in employed Swedish sailors. They tried all they could. But other European, like the Netherlands, or France, or Britain, or the Portuguese, were fiercely controlling that trade. 19th century, Germany was fully involved in African colonial pursuits. So I understand why Germany abstained as well, because they have the same interest as the rest of the European countries to defend.
And would campaigners expect Germany to support a resolution saying the transatlantic slave trade was the gravest crime against humanity? Doing so would implicitly rank it above the Holocaust Germany carried out under Hitler's Third Reich.
It was the gravest for people who died on African shores. It was the gravest for those who are at the end of the legacies of that past. So it remains the gravest. So it's really a question of position. Europe has chosen to commemorate certain crimes that it deemed more relevant, that it deemed more grave, really, than the rest of the world. And I take point to that, and I understand that, and it makes perfect sense. So why shouldn't Africans consider that transatlantic enslavement was the gravest?
So what does the split over the words of the resolution show us? Is it more a reflection of history or of geopolitical hierarchy today? Can you even separate the two?
I think it's also a political stance. It's about a bit David and Goliath. It's a fight against those who have and those who have been at the receiving end of colonial powers. So it was also a political move from countries that might not have been at the receiving end. I'm trying to figure out which country was not involved in colonialism, and I can't find any at all. So all the countries that voted had some history related to not necessarily transatlantic enslavement, but colonial history certainly. So they voted accordingly.
Would apologies be so important? Why are they so rare?
Absolutely. It's part of what is expected. The minimum was an apology, and apologies have not been done by most countries, except the Netherlands have done apologized. Germany has apologized. But if there is an apology, but without accountability, without atonement, so they kind of they're not meaningful at all. In European Christian ethos, if you apologize, then you have to atone. Atonement means repairing, and repairing means reparations in any form and shape. As for restitution, it's on the way. Some countries have done that, others are resisting. Germany has led that. The Netherlands have done that, and they're doing that by the way, not just about African artifacts, but also artifacts that were looted in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka, Indonesia. So things are happening at that end. So apologies are not just something that is enough. Restitution has to follow, and reparations can take many, many forms, has to follow as well.
What are countries doing to improve relations between the global south and north outside of the resolution? Are there any good examples?
What is interesting to me is that some countries have not apologized, but have done a lot. I'm thinking about France, for example. France refused to apologize, but it was the first country to acknowledge slavery outside the Durban Conference as a crime against humanity. And that was followed by a law called the Taubira law from Christian Taubira, from an MP from Guyana. And that meant that there was a complete shift of the school curriculum, the research. There was a memorialization put in place. There is now a whole month of memorialization that had an impact on the cultural discussion. So there's a whole thing that were put in place, and all that without an apology. So yes.
Not all countries involved in transatlantic slavery are in the global north. Brazil received millions of slaves but voted in favor of the resolution.
Yes, I mean, I'm not surprised that Brazil supported the resolution, because one of the countries that received the moved enslaved people from Africa was Brazil, and they came mostly from Angola, but not necessarily only from Angola. And European powers such as the Netherlands, Portugal started it, and then the Netherlands followed, and even in the 19th century, France was involved. So Brazil had a lot at stake there. And it's also a moment for Brazil to demonstrate that they are at the forefront with others colonial powers in the Caribbean on the topic of the reparations related to transatlantic enslavement, which was not the case for a very long time, because Brazil was slightly on the outskirts observing, and not necessarily working with CARICOM, the group of Caribbean countries that were fiercely working on the legacies of the past and on their 10-point reparations measures. So it is really important to have Brazil on board.
And how might this UN vote affect the global south on the international stage? Could it lead to greater confidence in dealing with global north, or greater self-monitoring on human rights?
I think that it's really a declaration that says that the global south is moving towards a kind of global union, perhaps in the shape and form as the European Union. And these are some of the first steps that are being taken. There was talks many, many years, I think it was Kwame Nkrumah, 1960s, I believe, who talks about the United States of Africa. But it's bigger than that. It's the United States of the world. And I think that could become maybe perhaps a threat for other big blocs. I don't know yet, because there's a military side and all kind of financial side that needs to be looked at. But I think it's a really important step towards that kind of union that might feel threatening to some countries in Europe.